Okay, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's IIED debates, where we're going to be looking towards a nature-positive economic recovery post-COVID-19. We are really delighted to be hosting today's event with the Green Economy Coalition. A huge thanks to all of you, our audience, for arriving promptly and being part of our virtual space today. We've got a really fantastic panel lined up, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing their insights from a new global analysis on integrating nature into COVID-19 recovery plans and budgets. My name is Juliet. I'm the events officer at IIED, and I'll be kind of behind the scenes today, providing some technical support. Before I hand over to Najma, who's going to kick off our discussion, I'm just going to share some quick instructions about how you can engage in today's discussion, because we'd love to hear from you as we go through. So just to note, this is a public event and it is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. We are also on Twitter, so please do join in the conversation with us using the hashtag IIED debates. You'll see a chat panel at the bottom of your Zoom window. This is a space for you to introduce yourself, your name, where you are in the world. We'd really love to get a feel for who's in the room with us. We also hope it will be a lively space where you can share your own insights, your reflections on the discussion. As the name of this event series suggests, we really do want to encourage some debate and conversation on the issues being discussed here today. You're also welcome to share links to resources and materials that you think your fellow participants will be interested in. And finally, do report any technical issues. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and I'll be there to provide some support. If you have questions for the speakers, and we really hope that you do, please put those specifically in the Q&A panel. That will just help us to spot them and monitor them more efficiently. If your question is for a specific speaker, please do indicate so, and also do let us know who you are when you pose your question. You are very welcome to help us prioritize these as well, which you can do by upvoting them. That's the little thumbs up next to the question. So if there's something you see that's quite interesting to you, or you thought you might like to ask yourself, then hit the thumbs up and it will move those up the rankings and we can address those questions first. Finally, we have enabled the live transcript feature. This is a subtitle tool automatically generated by Zoom. You can hide or show those subtitles as you prefer. And with that, I am absolutely delighted to hand over to Najma Mohammed. She is the Policy Director at the Green Economy Coalition and our moderator for today's discussion. Najma, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and good day, everybody, wherever you're joining from, and thank you for joining us at this webinar. So today we want to be sharing with you insights emerging from a global analysis on integrating nature into COVID-19 recovery plans and budgets. I lead the policy team at the Green Economy Coalition, which is the world's largest movement working towards a just transition to green and fair economies. So 2020 was meant to be a major policy year for nature. Governments were expected to gather in Kunming in China to draft new 10-year targets to protect nature. Countries were preparing to ramp up their ambition and to address climate change, including the use of nature-based solutions. And we were grappling with the alarm bell from global biodiversity scientists at the start of 2020 that nature was actually declining globally at rates never seen before in human history. But the bigger challenge of the COVID pandemic was awaiting all of us. And it was at this moment that the GEC, the Green Economy Coalition, through the Economics for Nature project, initiated a global policy analysis to look at how nature was being integrated in economic decision-making. And for the last 2 years, as we all know, decision-making has been dominated by how countries respond to the pandemic, ensuring the well-being of people and how we support economic recovery. Thank you, Juliet. If I could have the next slide. So you will see on the next slide that we were a partnership that really supported one another and worked on this program of work over the last year. As you can see today, we are from different parts of the world. The partnership brings together Brazil, France, India, and Uganda, with the Green Economy Coalition and our partner institution, IIED, based in London. Next slide, please, Juliet. So the team, I think, were unequivocal in our commitment, really, to the words of the UN Secretary General, that we felt that COVID recovery and our planet's repair must be two sides of the same coin. And even as we continue to move through different phases of the pandemic, we're beginning to realize how integral our economies, how integral the relationship and the connection between our economies and societies are. Next slide, please, Juliet. So across the world, there's been a growing consensus on the need to include green spending and measures in how we recover from the pandemic. We're beginning to see that green spending in renewable energy, in better ways of transport, in waste management, in a greener agriculture is beginning to shape some of our COVID-19 stimulus and recovery packages. But for the most part, global analysis shows that most COVID recovery plans still underinvest in nature. And yet nature underpins economy and our society on multiple levels. We see, more than half of the world's GDP either moderately or very highly dependent on nature, as our colleagues today will tell us from Brazil and from India, Uganda, where there's a very high dependence on nature. Yet 1/5 of countries are at risk of the ecosystems collapsing. And for the more than 1.2 billion workers whose jobs and livelihoods depend on healthy, stable ecosystems on nature, investing in nature seems obvious. But what are our governments doing? Next slide, please. So the national partners joining me here today will share with us some of the headline findings on how COVID recovery plans and national budgets are prioritizing or not nature. They've analyzed national spending and identified nature positive and nature negative recovery investments, and they've made recommendations on how their countries can sustain and conserve nature as part of their recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm delighted to be joined with the partners today. Marisol Goes, Amazon Green Economy Hub convener based at the Amazon Sustainable Foundation in Brazil. Christophe Picami, research consultant at Vertigo Lab in France. Shatabdi Datta, manager for policy and planning at Development Alternatives in India. And Aaron Werike, a national planner and consultant for Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment in Uganda. It's a pleasure to be amongst colleagues and friends here today, and we're looking forward to a really good discussion. Joining me today also is Paul Steele, who is chief economist in IIED and was partnering with the GEC on this work, and Paul is one of the technical leads and advisors on the project, and he will share the synthesis findings. So before we start, let me just remind you, if you've joined a bit later, that the chat function is there for you to introduce yourself, get to know one another, say hello to friends that you might be seeing here. And the Q&A function is particularly for you to pose your questions. So I know, Marisol, we've had this discussion multiple times in the year that we've met, and you've always said that Brazil goes first. So let's not break that tradition today, Marisol, and let's hand over to you to kickstart our discussion today. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Najma. It's a great honor to be here at this event and launch our case study on green recovery in the Amazon. Just a brief introduction, I'm the Amazon Bioeconomy Hub convener. The Amazon Bioeconomy Hub is an alliance between Foundation for Amazon Sustainability FAST and Green Economy Coalition. We exist to connect, develop, and scale up Amazonian bioeconomy solutions at national, regional, and global level. In the past 14 years, FAS, alongside its partners, has been developing solutions which proves that a green and inclusive economy is possible in the Amazon. And why Amazon Green Recovery matters, Amazon is the largest and most bioculture diverse ecosystem on Earth, and the figures on this slide demonstrate that. But Amazon is very close to reaching a tipping point of no return. Recently, the science panel for the Amazon revealed that the situation is very critical with existential implications for Amazon people who are already feeling the impacts of climate change and for climate regulation and economic consequences for the planet. So Brazil was hit very hard by the COVID pandemic, but the Amazon area was one of the hardest hitting. Of the more than 600,000 deaths, almost 12% occurred in the Brazilian Amazon. Please, Juliet, next slide. So in Brazil, more than Thank you, Juliet. In Brazil, more than 114 billions in tax and budget execution was expended to combat the effect of the pandemic in 2020, which represents around 7% of national GDP. Most of this resource was allocated to the health sector and to minimize the socioeconomic effects caused by the pandemic. We noticed and we can report that natural capital was not considered, as Najma informed, as a driver of these measures. In fact, there is no clear policy in Brazil or initiative from the federal government to promote a green economy recovery response as a way to mitigate the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic. Out of this resource, an estimated around $10 billion has been applied in the Amazon region, impacting natural capital in some way. So you can see among the negative measures on the left, we can report that agribusiness was considered the priority economic sector. Furthermore, 9 infrastructure concessions were foreseen to 2021, and 10 regulatory acts that had weakening the environmental governance in mining, fishing, and forestry. On the other hand, we had some positive measures in family farming, low carbon agriculture, a promotion of bioeconomy programming, a connectivity and sanitation improvement projects. And next slide, please, Juliet. Just to finish in this final slide, among the economic stimulus measures analyzed in our study, we can say that 87.2% were expected to negatively impact natural capital in the Amazon, while around 10% would contribute positively, and in 20.9%, there's uncertainty about the impact. So as I demonstrate, there is no green recovery move coming from the federal government in Brazil. However, what we can see is an unprecedented movement happening at the subnational level with local governors converging efforts, converging several public and private actors into a green recovery in the area. So facing the absence of protagonism coming from the federal government in the promotion of the green recovery, the governors of the state of the legal Amazon, they launched in July of this year what we call PRV, the Green Recovery Plan, the Amazon Green Recovery Plan, and with some guidelines and priorities for the region. And FAS is one of the organizations that has been acting in helping implementing and disseminating this plan in the Amazon area. So this study was developed by the Amazon Bioeconomy Hub with the support of my colleague, Carlos Rigolo, is aimed at supporting local governments and in the implementation of this plan, the PRV, in the region. So I end this presentation and I thank again GC, IIED, and Economics for Nature for this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Marisol, and you were excellent in keeping to time. Luckily for me, it's been months of working together and seeing, the richness in the story that you're telling. I hope we've got lots of time, that we all stay to time in our presentations and we can have lots of, good discussions on the presentation. So just a reminder, if you've got a question for Marisol, please use the Q&A function. You can ask her a question directly on the presentation, or perhaps listen to all 4 or 5 presentations and formulate your question thereafter. So let me hand over now to France, to Christophe. Please go ahead, Christophe.
Thank you, Najma, and thank you, Marisol. It was a great presentation. So my name is Christophe Picamil. I work for Vertigo Lab, which is a small French company specialized in socioeconomic and environmental evaluation. So concerning the study we have conducted with GEC, So we have evaluated the impacts on biodiversity of the French recovery plan, which was presented in September 2020 with a budget of 100 billion euros. The French recovery plan, which is called Plan Relance, includes 64 measures we have classified according to their impacts on natural capital. Major measures of this plan include substantial tax reduction for French companies. They support employment measure, the car and the industry, and also public investment in the health sector. Therefore, the study concluded that most of the French recovery plan budget is very difficult. I mean, its impacts on biodiversity are very ambiguous and difficult to analyze. Almost half of its budget was qualified either as impossible to assess or as neutral. And only, as you can see, only 1% of its budget is expected to have a strong positive impact on natural capital. So we consider, despite the strong dependence of the French economy on biodiversity, the government has missed the opportunity to invest in nature and to truly integrate natural capital into decision making. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our recommendations aim at reducing the uncertainty concerning its impacts on biodiversity and to integrating nature-based solutions in order to increase human well-being and to bring immediate economic benefits to French society. Our recommendation include adding environmental conditions to industry and companies support measure because they represent an important part of the plan, and the number of uncertainties is very important. So in order to protect natural capital, it will be essential for the French government to focus its investments toward the environmentally friendly sectors. Another recommendation will be to monitor the implementation of announced measure because measures, some of its measures support the car and the air industry, which are sectors which can be harmful to biodiversity. And the last recommendation we have made was to systematize nature-based solution because they can bring immediate economic stimulus to society. So that's for me. Thank you for your attention, and I hand over to Najma. Thank you.
Merci, Christophe. Thank you so much. I think, we're hearing from Marisol, and we saw the figures, the percentage going towards agribusiness in the Amazon, recovery efforts, or the recovery efforts in the region. And from Christophe, we've heard, in France, the type of industries that are being supported. I think hopefully when we get into the Q&A, we'd have an opportunity to share with you the incredible richness of experience and exchange amongst the team, and how in very different economies and geographies across the world, we found that we could learn from one another, but also the strategies, as we will hear later, of engaging our governments. So let me hand over to Shatabdi from India to share their story, and it was very interesting to see how the interesting exchange between France and India, in the area of agriculture, and both countries, wanting to commit to an agroecological transition and having ambitions in that direction. So over to you, Shatabdi. You're on mute.
Yeah. Thanks, Najma. Yeah. So this is Shatabdi from Development Alternatives. So we are a civil society organization in India. So as a part of this study, we also did analysis of the COVID recovery package of the government. So to understand how natural capital is represented in the governmental budget. So it is quite evident that India has also widespread impacts of the pandemic on lives, livelihood, and the economy. So to come out of this pandemic, of the economic impacts of the pandemic, green economic recovery is fundamental to cope with the external shocks and to meet developmental goals. So, as like Najma has already emphasized before, that like India is heavily dependent, like natural capital and biodiversity rich country, and it majorly contributes to the various sectors like agriculture, forestry, tourism, and also contribute to generation of livelihoods. Juliet, next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. In the COVID recovery budget, so the government announced a COVID recovery package in 2021, 2020 and 21 financial year. So it amounted to 260 billion USD. In this budget, we some of the priority sectors that were there were agriculture and the light sector, micro, small and medium enterprise sector, rural development, mining and power sector. So we found that almost 18% of the total allocations in these five sectors had positive natural capital impact. But it was quite surprising that a major chunk of the allocations were ambiguous. Like we couldn't identify the direction of natural capital impact of those interventions, whether those have positive or negative influence on natural capital. But there also existed a few good policies which were relevant for green recovery, but there also had some gaps, certain gaps, which I'm coming later. And also, we looked at the annual budget of the current financial year for the same five sectors. So here we found that it had quite a lot of positive natural capital allocations, like almost 50% of the annual budget had positive allocations. Juliet, next slide, please. Yeah, on the left, we have identified a few gaps in these policies in these two budgets. So we found that there in the COVID recovery package, it mostly focused on monetary policy rather than fiscal policies, and also there are certain schemes were ambiguous in terms of outcomes that could impact natural capital. And in spite of having certain good policies, there existed gaps in implementation and last mile connectivity. There were inequality in access to the benefits of those policies. And also, certain policies didn't have consistent allocations in the budget. So from these, we came up with certain recommendations for the government. For example, it is very important to strengthen the natural capital positive schemes and emphasis on the equitable implementation at national and subnational level. And while designing the policies, we need to focus on both short-term and long-term strategies. We need to strengthen the environmental regulations. There has to be a balance between fiscal and monetary policy interventions. And also, while designing the policies, when the government policymakers are defining the outcome targets, natural capital component needs to be considered so that it has defined outcome targets towards creating positive impact on natural capital, and a sufficient scheme level information are needed on public forums to conduct more these kind of studies and analysis. And also we need to engage more with policymakers and different relevant stakeholders to further drive green and inclusive economic recovery. Yeah, so that's all from my side. Thank you. Over to Najma. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shatabdi. And let me hand over now to our last national partner from Uganda, Aaron. And I remember Aaron shared something on one of our team meetings that really struck me, because Uganda is a country that's been engaging, with natural capital mainstreaming for a while. There are national accounts in place for natural capital accounting. And I remember, Aaron said something very significant. He said you can have all the laws and the institutions in place, but then the money has got to flow, in that direction. So Aaron, let me not take any more of your time. Over to you.
Thank you, Najma. Thank you, Juliet, for the slides. Well, to continue from where you've stopped, Najma, Uganda is largely a natural capital reliant country, with agriculture accounting for about a quarter of the GDP and employing over 70% of the population. When you look at our GDP composition, tourism is a very key player, and forestry, and yet tourism is largely motivated by nature. It is natural-based tourism. So nature plays really a key role and significant role in our economic development. With COVID-19, we had to have a number of interventions. But unlike the previous 3 countries, we didn't have a standalone COVID-19 recovery package. It was rather integrated in the conventional annual budgeting system. So our COVID-19 recovery packages were in the form of the national budgets for the last 2 financial years, and some additional interventions for selected institutions to resuscitate the businesses. So to start with our first economic recovery package, of which is the budget for the financial 2020-2021, which ended in June this year. The budget was themed on stimulating the economy to safeguard livelihoods, jobs, businesses, and industrial recovery. And our analysis in partnership with JEC and IIED revealed that 40% of this budget, or this recovery package, was responsive to natural capital. That means either positively or negatively, although only 3.7% was allocated to water and environment, but there were other interventions on natural capital which were found in other programs on agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, among others. So 40% being compliant means that 60% of the remainder of the budget was neutral or ambiguous, like my friends have informed, on governance and other issues which are not very related to natural capital. Now, of the 40% which was compliant to natural capital, which was impacting natural capital, 70% of that was strong positive, 15% weak positive, and 15% strong negative. The 7% being strong positive implies that these were interventions which were tailored to activities that work for natural capital, such as restoration of forests, demarcating forest boundaries, enhancing compliance, enforcement to environmental pollution, among others. But also, like I've informed, our economy revolves around natural capital. So the percentages are kind of obvious and given because we are not a very highly industrialized country. It is mainly primary agriculture production and other interventions which are reliant on nature without really polluting the environment. However, there were also strong interventions, strong negative interventions, such as clearance of bush for agriculture, clearing virgin areas for agriculture, and prioritization of a number of crops such as sugar canes, which are in fragile ecosystems like forestry reserves and have over the years been key drivers of natural capital depletion. So for the second recovery package, which is the budget for the 2020-2021, the current financial year, this was also themed on speeding up economic recovery and driving inclusive driving inclusive growth. But this was much less impactful on natural capital, with only 28% of it found to be responsive to natural capital management, with even a further decline in what was earmarked for the water and environment interventions, those which follow under the mandated institutions charged with conserving natural capital. Of the 28% interventions which were found to be responsive to natural capital, 60% were strong positive, 26% were weak positive, and 13% were strong negative. And just to highlight on the strong negative interventions, we had issues such as purchase of land for palm oil production in one of the islands in Lake Victoria. And palm oil has been a key driver of deforestation on one other island, where forests were cleared to really pave way for commercial palm oil plantations. And yet it had no clear biodiversity offsets plans. And then the budget was also inclined to stimulating and kickstarting our industrialization agenda and petroleum development, although no resources were earmarked to ensure that these happen in compliance with environment and natural resource management. Issues such as enforcement of compliance to the permits for water resources management were really not highlighted, and they were quite silent in the recovery package. And also there were no interventions on how to manage the COVID-19 waste strain. So those were some of the negative interventions. Equally important, there was nothing on electronic waste, which is quite increasing. So the budget was only 28% responsive to natural capital, with some positive, strong positive interventions and other weak positive interventions. Can we continue, Juliet? Julie, yeah, now besides the bigger recovery packages, which are the two budgets for the previous two financial years, as I informed, there were some direct interventions or money which was advanced to a number of institutions like the Uganda Development Bank. This one lends out to businesses. Now the allocations of what was allocated to natural capital was assessed, and we noted that the bank has environmental sustainability as one of its principles, and the disbursement of this money, 30% of it went to agriculture, 30% to agro industry, those are industries which are engaged in agriculture production and productivity. Then 23% went to manufacturing. However, there was no clarity of information on what actual interventions were implemented because of the confidential nature of lending, whereby the banks may not want to disclose exactly what their clients are using the money for, having signed disclosure agreements with them. So this was not very assessed deeply because of the scarcity and the scant information available. Then lastly, in terms of monetary policy, the COVID-19 response was largely inclined to the fiscal policy as showed by the budgets and the government expenditure to Uganda Development Bank. But there are also other specific fiscal policy interventions which are really work for nature or against it. We have the deficit financing, which engaged borrowing, of course, to address some of the interventions on natural capital which have been addressed in the previous two recovery packages. But also there are some shortfalls in our fiscal policy whereby the money collected from environmental levies, environmental taxes is plowed back to is put in the consolidated fund. It's not really, there is no clarity on whether this money is used to address environmental issues. So there is a likelihood that money which is gotten from environmental fines, environmental taxes, and penalties is used to degrade the environment in one way or another, because there is no disclosure of information on the flow and expenditure of the revenue collected from environmental taxes. So that is a gap in the fiscal policy, which we think as we recover needs to be addressed. And then lastly, the monetary policy goal of is to maintain the inflation rate at 5%, and natural capital has a key role to play here because our inflation rate is largely driven by food prices. Whenever we have food scarcity, we have inflation rising hyperly because food prices are a key determinant of inflation. Can we move to the recommendations?
Aaron, can I ask you to use 1 minute to wrap up? And okay. Also I see in the chat that Juliet has posted the Uganda study. So that's also available for participants to look at. So 1 minute for your recommendations, Aaron, I think that comes.
Yeah, thank you. For the recommendations, we're looking at two things, largely ensuring that the budget before the budget is passed in Parliament is scrutinized through a natural capital lens, and we are working with Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment, which is a call to ensure that this comes to fruition, and also coming up with fiscal environmental reforms, because currently natural capital is underpriced. The externalities from development are not captured in the prices of goods and services. So natural capital is treated as a free good, which fuels its degradation. So we are calling for fiscal environment reforms, which really integrate natural capital also in the pricing and in the taxes imposed on a number of producers and factories. And lastly, we needed an engagement strategy with policymakers who are in Parliament, in the Ministry of Finance, to ensure that the budgets and the plannings are highly informed and reliant on natural capital accounting, which generally we've already commented on. And I think with these recommendations once implemented, we shall be able to get to that. Thank you, Najma, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I don't think that the 5 minutes we've allocated to each of the national partners would do justice, right, Paul, to the incredible discussions that we've had as a team over the last few months of learning that's happened, between partners. Paul, would you take us in the last few minutes before we open up the Q&A? And just a reminder, if you haven't yet, please post your questions in the Q&A, and then we can have a look at them and vote for the ones that you want us to prioritize. Or maybe some from your side to share, on some of the country learnings that have emerged.
Great, thanks, Najma, and other colleagues who presented. It's been a real privilege to work with such an engaged and active team representing analysts actually in their own countries who can get the data and discuss it with policymakers and follow up and disseminate the findings. So I'm just going to present two quick slides before we open up for discussion, and should have about 20 minutes there. But the first slide, as you see, takes all the different bits of data that has been presented from the rich national studies and tries to summarize it on one graph. And you see at the bottom there, strong positive impact, low positive impact, low negative impact, strong negative impact, neutral, and then unable to assess. And this kind of methodology we developed as a group and refined and then discussed several times. So this is very much a group set of findings I'm presenting. So you see strong positive impact represented by particularly by the blue column is Uganda. So as Aaron presented, despite some hiccups, by and large, the COVID recovery package in the budget was a strongly positive impact on natural capital. So that shows that Uganda, if you like, has a lot of positive lessons to share other countries. Second, moving to the second set of columns, no positive impact, and then was particularly the case of France, where you see that there were some positive impacts, particularly around some of the areas that Christophe presented, like organic agriculture and so on, I think it was. Then moving to low negative impact, there you see Brazil coming out almost 90%. So by and large, the focus in Brazil, as we've heard from Marisol, was on the agribusiness, and that had generally no negative impacts on natural capital. Not surprisingly, many of the agribusinesses are likely to impact and cut down pre-existing forest lands. Then moving to strong negative impact, a combination of Uganda and India. So we heard from India that there was some negative impacts, particularly around mining, as Shatabdi presented, and as you can see from their country report. In terms of neutral, there were some issues, and then particularly in India and a bit in France, some areas were unable to assess, in that it's going to depend on how the funding plays out. And I'll come back to that in my final slide. Juliet, please. So these are 6 recommendations, again, based on the 4 country studies. And this was discussed, I think, twice by the team in our monthly or 6 weekly team calls. So again, it's very much a team effort. So it's recommendations for the COVID recovery, which will be presented along with the summaries of the synthesis of the country studies in what we're calling a synthesis report, which we'll all be collectively co-authoring and will hopefully come out in the next couple of months or so. So the first one point that all of us have been making is governments should invest in natural capital to bring economic benefits, growth opportunities. I mean, it's an obvious point for the audience here, but we still need to make the point clearly to governments and to other and to parliamentarians and so on who control the budget. Secondly, and perhaps this is a more novel point, but did emerge from the findings, governments need to recognize that natural capital investments drive social inclusion. So they're not just good for nature, but they're also good for poor people, particularly poor women and men who are at the front line of suffering the impacts of natural capital degradation. And just to give some examples, we've heard particularly from India and so on about small and medium scale enterprises and how these are important to receive COVID recovery funds. And many of these SMEs are dependent on nature, such as small and medium scale enterprises in the agri-food processing business. Also indigenous rights, particularly the case from Amazon, but also some other countries. I'm sure you can think of your own country if you're participating, where indigenous rights are hugely linked to nature. And then social protection, again, to take the example of India, one of the things that happened is that India has this enormous, I think it's probably the world's biggest social protection scheme, the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which depends on investing in watersheds, and that received some additional COVID recovery funds. Third recommendation is that governments should link credit facilities to environmental conditionality. We heard a bit about this from Aaron in Uganda, but it applies pretty much to all the countries. And actually, this is one of the issues why in some countries it was unclear, it was challenging to assess the impacts of the recovery funds on natural capital, because depending on the extent to which credit facilities such as banking loans and loans to the development banks were linked to environmental conditionality, it wasn't clear to what extent these would be good or bad for the environment. And we heard about that from I think Uganda and also from France. Then I've already mentioned this, governments should support environmentally friendly small and medium scale enterprises. Fifthly, particularly the case of Brazil, but also other countries, government should support small-scale agriculture and not support environmentally damaging agribusiness. And then finally, particularly from India, governments should not support environmentally damaging mining. So I'll stop there and hand over to Najma and look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, the questions are really great. We've got about 15 minutes in our time to get to the questions, and I think let's kick start off. So Anna's question got the most votes. So Anna's asking the question: how important do you see public-private finance schemes being to raise finance to fund nature positive solutions? How do you see the future of public-private intersection evolving? That's the one question. So I'm going to I'll just mention the 3 questions, and while I give the panelists time to think about it. The second question, which I think Marisol, you might have addressed in the chat, but I'm happy if you want to just share it again, is one from Steve Bass, who asks about the mentions the Brazil State Governance Initiative and the new Amazon Green Recovery Plan. And what would you advise governors to do that would make the biggest difference in shifting from deforestation to a conservation-based economy? And the third question that I'd like to take is really, I think, from Chris, because I think this brings a sort of cross-country learning. Were there any examples of nature-positive COVID recovery policy interventions that were common across the countries, and any negative policies that the countries shared? So, looking to the panel, we would like to take Anna's question. And if we don't have time, may I also ask panelists, perhaps also see if we can answer some of the questions we won't get to while they respond to the ones we're going to take on the webinar. So anyone up for the first question? The public-private financing schemes and how they can be used to raise finance. Marisol, I see add-on, but I'll give you the first go. Go ahead.
Yes, in our case, in Amazon, first of all, I thank you, Anna, for the question. In Amazon, we've seen these, especially hybrid financial mechanisms that has been arising in the past 3 years, and they prove being very important because they tend to be more patient capital, especially for example, businesses at early stage, which requires a more patient investment, and private and public, they tend to make this philanthropy, strategic philanthropy mechanisms, which are more adherent to the reality of the businesses, the forest-based enterprises in the Amazon. So I do believe that this is already a reality in the area, and it has provoked, it has emerged, it has helped to boost an innovative ecosystem in the Amazon. So I do believe that this is a reality already. It's not just a future, but it's already a reality, at least in the Amazon.
Thank you, Marisol. Aaron, do you want to come back? Would you want to come on that question before we move to the other questions? The sort of models and opportunities for public and private finance to come together for nature-positive recovery. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you, Najma. Yeah, I think the outlook for public-private partnerships and investment for nature is bright, because it is increasingly becoming clear that the private sector has to really integrate natural capital in its operations, and going beyond just having a relationship of corporate social responsibility to actual investment. So we've seen a number of local green enterprises coming up, and also a number of investors, and even some banks coming up with financial products in form of equity to finance innovative natural capital responsive interventions. So I think the future is bright, but also to nurture it more, the public sector or the government-owned development financing institutions need to de-risk the investments in natural capital enterprises to be able to address those impending factors which inhibit investment by putting in place relevant infrastructure or coming up with a low-cost credit to attract more investors in natural capital, because it is a new market and the returns are not yet clear, but the future is bright. Thank you.
Absolutely, Aaron. Thank you, and thank you, Aaron and Marisol, for your responses. So Marisol, the next question is for you. So while you think about that, let me just give Christoph and Shatabdi maybe a heads up to start thinking about the question. You know, what was common amongst the countries. But maybe let me just add on this sort of public-private sector question before I hand back to you, Marisol, is that I think what really struck me from across the countries is that there was a lot of investment going towards infrastructure in across the countries. And I do think, I mean, I was struck, Marisol, when Carlos from your team was speaking about the positive impact on sanitation infrastructure, on the natural capital in the Amazon, because they would sanitation systems would be formalized, river health would be improved. So I do think we've got to start thinking about investment in nature, not only as direct investment into the strong natural capital investment into biodiversity and nature, but also think about how are we investing in infrastructure that we need. How will we build the roads that we need? How will we invest in the sanitation systems or the housing infrastructure that we need? Marisol, do you want to take Steve's question on the Green Recovery Plan before I hand to Christoph and Shatabdi on the third question?
Yes, thank you, Najma. Thank you, Steve. So based on our study, the most important recommendation, let's say, we believe that bioeconomy must occupy a strategic position as an intersectoral public policy. Still in Brazil, we still have a very diffuse governance when it comes to bioeconomy. We do not have any national plan for bioeconomy, and this impacts the incentives in the Amazon area. So that's why we do believe that public spending, having a national plan for bioeconomy, and we have a movement arising coming from consultation for Amazon, Brazilian coalition, different forums, national forums that are seeking and that are recommending and working to, and making pressure to have a national bioeconomy plan, because nowadays still the spendings are concentrated into MAPA, which is the Ministry of Agriculture, and we do believe that having a national plan would be more transversal and as it needs, as bioeconomy needs to really be a very structural element in the area.
Thank you so much, Marisol. And might I just encourage all of you to have a look at the FAS website to understand what Marisol means when she speaks about an Amazon bioeconomy, because it might not be what you have in your mind, you know, in an economy where it's, you know, led by big businesses. It's very much in a people-led sort of strategy for, you know, an economy that preserves and conserves the forest, but also enables local communities, you know, to make a living and to get, you know, their livelihood from the forests. Shatabdi, Christoph, the big question, but Paul, please come in here because I know that you're working with all of us on getting the synthesis findings out of the work. Shatabdi, what would you think from, I mean, it's been months where we've spoken to one another, pulled one another, I think, through this moment of the pandemic. What would strike you as, you know, some of the common findings across the countries in our experiences with natural capital and natural negative investments?
Yeah, so one could be regarding the agricultural and the life sector. So I think across all the countries, there has been certain interventions which have very strong natural capital. For example, promotion of organic farming or micro irrigation projects and all, and also certain intervention in this sector also has strong negative influence on natural capital.
Thanks, Shatabdi. I think the first time when India shared with us the example of investment in agriculture being natural capital positive, we were comparing that with the investment in Brazil, you know, in the agribusiness. But I think the important and the richness of the work, and I encourage you all to look at the studies, is that in India, Shatabdi, correct me, there's a big move, as you said, you know, to invest in organic agriculture for states who wants to go entirely, you know, organic. And it's something that those of us on the outside were not aware of. Initially, we were thinking that investment in agriculture, you know, would be, you know, negative. But then, you know, so much of the context, the policy context, you know, matters. Christoph, is there anything you'd want to add before I see if Paul wants to bring anything, perhaps on the natural capital negative or?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Shatabdi because in France too, we have seen some improvements toward the agricultural transition. So yeah, most of good positive impact in measures in France were agricultural measures. So that's a good thing. But concerning negative measures, it's hard to say because mining sectors, I mean, sectors such as mining sectors in France, we don't have this kind of sector in our country, so it's very hard to comment. We don't have any strong negative measures in France, but it's mostly because right now we import a lot of natural resources from countries in Africa, in Asia. So it's another debate, actually.
It is indeed another debate, Crystal. Thanks for that reflection. Paul, before I just put one question, and I'm afraid we've run out of time. The questions are excellent. Please, panelists, if you have the time, respond to them directly in the Q&A. Paul, any reflections from your side? I know you're pulling everything together. I know you mentioned that one of the surprising findings was that investing in natural capital is also good for people because of the amount of livelihoods and jobs and industries that actually depend on healthy, stable ecosystems.
Yeah, thanks, Najma. I mean, maybe with my last minute or two, that what I'd like to do is just maybe encourage others on this call to delve into the analysis, as you've said, Najma, but also to see if they're in France, India, Brazil, or Uganda, whether it chimes with their own findings. There was a question about the role of civil society in the chat, which I thought was particularly relevant. Civil society has a role encouraging this debate and getting these kind of issues to decision makers, whether they're in the public or the private sector. But I think it would be great for those of you whose country isn't covered to do a similar kind of analysis, or encourage a similar kind of analysis, or even reach out to us to work with you to do a similar kind of analysis. It's frankly not rocket science. It's very straightforward. You look at how much governments are spending, the budget. As an economist, and I'm sure I'm a bit biased, but I think it's true, is the key decision-making mechanism of a government and of society as a whole. If you spend a lot on tearing down your forests, it's going to be bad. If you spend a lot of money on organic agriculture, it's obviously going to be good for natural capital. So basically, just look at the numbers. How much is being spent by your government on different aspects of natural capital, and to what extent they're positive and negative. And that kind of analysis, while it's relatively straightforward, it's amazing how little work has been done on this. This is really the first ever national studies that have been done, and it would be great to get more of them going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I know there are many questions in the chat that we didn't get to, but we know that though 2020 wasn't the year when we could come together to draft, a new plan, new goals for nature, and how we move, towards a nature-positive economy by 2030. Can I ask Marisol Chatabti, Christoph Aron, 30 seconds, your one sort of last message, for your country to take, the findings, recommendations seriously, to consider them as they try to build, rebuild the economy, stimulate, livelihoods, but also, protect the planet on which we all depend. Marisol, we have to start with Brazil. Your 30 seconds.
Yes. So first again, Najma, we must be part of the solution. We have no more time. Amazon is reaching a tipping point. This would lead us a complete collapse. So we must act as individuals, as decision makers, and we must be part of the solution, not just the problem. So thank you, Najma.
Thank you, Marisol. Christoph, your final words to the French government.
Very, very hard question. I feel right now we are focusing too much on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to focus more on biodiversity, natural capital. We have to broaden our scope, because it's very important, and yet the situation is very, very critical.
Thank you so much, Christoph. Shatabti.
Yeah, so I think for the government, it is very important to identify the strengths and the weaknesses, so we can build on the strengths to identify the intended policies that have positive influence on natural capital, and also to understand the unintended impacts to minimize the negativities that deplete natural capital. So that should be the prime focus of the government.
Thank you, Shatabdi. Aaron.
Thank you, Najma. I think it's very important to implement what has been planned. And for Uganda, we already have a starting point of having some natural capital accounts developed. So these are already in the plan. If we can implement that, then we shall go a long way in conserving natural capital, because we have an ambitious industrialization agenda, and it's very easy to pursue this industry and the industrialization at the expense of the environment. So we need to enforce the implementation, and civil society has a key role to play here to hold government accountable and foster such conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That would be exactly, my sentiments. We often think about nature as, existing in the national parks, or, but nature is, it's in the way that we live, the way we consume, the way we industrialize, the way we build our economies. And so I think first, the recognition of that dependence, has to be done for us to begin to identify and understand how we can plan, how we can recover, and design the measures that protect, conserve, and maintain nature. I thank you for the great discussion. This work is ongoing, as you can hear. All of the partners, I think the hardest part comes now, having governments engage and incorporate the recommendations in how we recover from the pandemic, even as we continue to go through the phases of the pandemic in India. Development alternatives have engaged with the government. In Brazil, our partners are actively involved in the Amazon Green Recovery Plan. And tomorrow morning, Uganda will host a breakfast dialogue where they'll have the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. So hopefully, Aaron, we get to speak to the people that pull the purse strings and get this message. And I think this team has been incredible, as Paul has said, working at country level to engage the key processes and institutions. And I think, just to reiterate, our biggest hope is that we firstly recognize the dependence of our economies and societies on nature, and second, that we plan and invest and design recovery measures that protect this essential part of life. So a big thank you to all the presenters. And before we wrap up, I think, Juliet, a final message from IIED and GEC. We have two big moments coming up that we'd love to share with you. I think Juliet will post details in the chat. But IIED will host the Barber Award lecture on coming up in early December, the 6th December, that will be focused on the role of women in development. It's either online or in person if you happen to be based in the UK. And next week, the GEC is hosting our 2021 global meeting online under the theme Code Red for Nature and People, finding the best solutions for scaling a COVID green recovery. And we encourage you to join. We'll be taking this discussion on a nature positive economy and recovery much further, and look forward to seeing those of you who can join us there next week. So thank you so much for joining us on the webinar, and hope you all have a great day further. It was wonderful to bring the energy and the enthusiasm of this team to a bigger community. Thanks, everybody. Take care.